acceptance.
I used to think that people were just born with natural business acumen. You know what I mean? Like they could navigate office politics really well. They knew just how to talk or how to schmooze, or they have the gift of gab. And I didn't understand. I figured that people were just kind of born that way. And anytime I would get into situations, you'd have water cooler talk, or you have just small talk at meetings or in the office, I would be really, really awkward. Does anybody know anybody like that? Like, I would kind of insert myself into conversations, and I would laugh a little bit too loud, or I would, say the wrong thing, or I would just stand there awkwardly while everybody was talking, and they'd look at me, and I'd just be there until I kind of slink away. And so I thought that, this just wasn't for me. Like, I was never going to learn how to be a good communicator. I was super awkward. I was never going to be able to manage my mindset and my emotions and those kind of scenarios. And I definitely never imagined that I would ever be a public speaker, an international public speaker nonetheless. So I've learned how to manage my emotions, and I've learned how to manage my state of mind. So as I learned to improve my communications, I started to share it with people. And this talk, in fact, is one of my most requested talks. I've delivered it at workshops, as a keynote, and training workshops at offices and tech conferences all around the world, at Microsoft, at different places and corporate trainings. So it's really needed, I think, in our industry. And most of us, we go to school. We go to school for math. We go to school for science. We go to school for English. We do not go to school for emotional intelligence. Right? We are not taught these things at school. We are also not taught these skills at home. My personal situation is kind of extreme. I grew up here. I started my life in a teeny tiny little shack in the middle of nowhere in the North Woods of Michigan. And it was very, very cold. We didn't have running water. We didn't have insulation, and my parents were very, very keen on surviving, and they didn't really have emotional intelligence skills to teach me, much less even to use themselves. So, I learned this stuff and I figured it out on my own, and quite frankly, it's why I get out of bed every morning. It really lights me up. And so while my situation might be extreme, a lot of us just walking around out there and working and living our lives, we also have not been taught these skills of emotional intelligence. And so, I know that it's possible. Even if I can do it against all odds, then, you could do it too. And I've seen how learning to manage my state of mind and managing my emotions and improving these skills has helped me quite a bit. And like I said, I'm an international speaker. I've spoken on all 7 continents, and I mentor people in tech and help them negotiate salary increases. I coach executives, and they're all thriving, specifically because of these techniques that I've taught. My name is Christina Aldan. I am a brand strategy consultant. I'm based in Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm a speaker, trainer. I'm a soon-to-be author. I coach people a lot on imposter syndrome, and so my memoir is about how I've felt like an imposter my entire life. If you want to continue this conversation online, please use the hashtag LuckyEQ. Thanks so much for having me today. So, this used to be me. I used to be this guy. I don't get it, right? I was not so great at relationships. and once I learned how to manage my emotions better, I got better results. And so fear and anxiety were really what drove a lot of my reactions and my responses and my relationships with people. But these days I have reduced stress, I have better results from my team, even during a global pandemic, and I have improved relationships. And I wasn't born with business acumen. I wasn't born with a natural gift of gab and social skills. I still sometimes even have to work hard at it, because sometimes I'm still really awkward every now and then. But at least I'm not having panic attacks regularly, or every time that I step into a room. And now these days I'm very lucky to have a wide range, a tribe of supporters who help me out. So the average person vacillates between 465 emotions a day. So that means we're feeling stress, we're feeling fear, we're feeling excitement, anticipation, we're feeling nervous, we're feeling shame, we're feeling guilt, 465 times a day. And so these emotions, they influence every single aspect of our lives. We're either moving toward pleasure or away from pain. In fact, people will do almost anything to avoid feeling the pain that they're feeling. In marketing, we definitely know this, right? Because people's emotions can be very easily manipulated to buy our products, buy our services, if we know that they are moving toward pleasure or away from pain. And cultivating emotional intelligence, it can be difficult work, because there are a lot of different facets to consider and to take it into consideration. And really, there's no perfect way to cultivating emotional intelligence. So the key is to find your own path and do it your way. There are 7.8 billion people on the planet. That's 7.8 billion different ways to live a life, And it's really tough out there, especially now during a global pandemic, and we're all trying to get adjusted to this new normal, and still, at the end of the day, the world expects us to show up, right? Maybe you have a sick child at home, and still you've got to produce. Maybe you're recovering from long COVID, still you have to show up. Maybe you're super stressed and things are tight, money's difficult, but you are still expected to be professional, to do your job, and to show up. And so managing your mindset, managing your emotions comes into play in doing this. So despite all of our challenges, we're still expected to manage our emotions. And few of us are taught these qualities at home, and we often don't even have the emotional support that we need at work. So we see instances of people who are losing their jobs because they're super stressed and they're ranting, or they're killing their relationships at work, or they're just impossible to work with. So research shows that 60 to 80% of all difficulties in organizations, they stem from strained relationships between employees. It's not necessarily the skill or their motivation, but it's these challenges of the interpersonal relationships. And most bosses, they don't want to deal with it, right? We've heard this. We're all adults here. Go work it out. Or you're going to have to work it out. You're in the same department, figure it out, right? You're acting like you're 5, but they actually don't give you any guidance on how, or a pathway, or the tools, or even what those difficult conversations look like, right? So then from the employee perspective, what the data tell us is that they feel discouraged, they feel taken advantage of. What happens is they start to show up late. Maybe they get sick more often. Maybe they start to dislike their work. They don't follow the policies or the procedures. They start to feel a little bit of rebellion against the culture at work, right? Theft will increase. This happens when people are very disgruntled with their job. Customer satisfaction decreases. And then that negative attitude, it keeps building and building and building, and company morale fails. So, it's my belief that true leaders, they don't necessarily make their subordinates come to them. What they do is they go to their team and they ask them, what they need. How can I support your success? And you don't have to be a manager or a supervisor to be a leader, right? You can lead from within. You can lead your team from within with your peers who are at the same level as you. Most managers, they don't want to deal with it. A typical manager spends 25 to 40% of their time dealing with workplace conflicts. And so that's 1 or 2 work days a week. And they just don't want to deal with your conflict, your petty arguments, or whatever they want to look at it as. So they just want you to figure it out. And so the cost of losing and replacing these employees, it could be as high as 150% of the departing employee's salary. So it's actually better for the company in most cases to try to help employees gain the skills for social and emotional intelligence to help them negotiate those conflicts better and to deal with things better. And it's really important to note that when I'm talking about managing your emotions, I'm not talking about fake it till you make it. Who's heard of fake it till you make it before? You've heard of that, right? Who's tried fake it till you make it? And now from that show of hands, did it work? No, fake it till you make it does not work. Listen, there is a time and a place for fake it till you make it. Let's say, you're really frustrated. There's something that's out of your control. You need to pause, put that in a box for a moment, fake it for a few hours till you go home and you can process those difficult emotions. Talk about it. Talk to your therapist about it. Talk to your boss or supervisor about it. Okay, that kind of works. However, I am a big proponent of just being yourself and letting it all hang out. If you sign a contract with me at Arana Software, I am going to let the crazy out on day 1, because I'll tell you what, if you don't like me on day 1, you're definitely not going to like me at the 11th hour when the build's broken or the campaign didn't get launched because of whatever reason and it's high stress and everybody's freaking out, right? So fake it till you make it does not work in this case. I'm talking about cultivating emotional intelligence skills that are going to help you thrive, improve your relationships, improve your communications. Because when you understand yourself and the people around you, you're going to be able to have a clearer picture on how you fit into that community, what you can contribute, and what others can do to best support you, right? So does anybody feel like this sometimes at work, right? Who wants to do this every single morning when your alarm wakes you up and you think, oh God, not today. Like I can't. It's all too much today, right? And if we're going to work and we're spending 50 to 60 hours of our week in discomfort and stress and conflict, well, who wants to do that? It's stressful. That's just sucky. You're in constant fight or flight mode. Nobody wants that. Numerous studies show us that your mental and your physical health will be declined for long periods of chronic stress if you're experiencing that. And there have been times when I personally have experienced crippling panic attacks on the job and, had to pull it together. And so while stress in the workplace is unavoidable, there are ways that we can cultivate more emotional intelligence to deal with it. And anybody who saw my talk earlier saw this slide about neuroplasticity. So with neuroplasticity, that means that we can learn new things by creating new neural pathways, by building stronger connections, and also letting go of the neural pathways, dissolving the neural pathways and connections that no longer serve us anymore. And neuroplasticity is this quality. We used to think that we could not create new brain cells. We used to think that very little about the brain. And in the last 7-8 years, we've learned so much more about how our brains function and the neuroscience behind it. I gave this example earlier during my keynote about how when I was crawling around as a little baby at my grandma's house and picked up a metal bobby pin and inserted it into the outlet, the electrical outlet, and I stimulated that neural pathway just one time. When we stimulate things over and over again through repetition or through the strength of the stimulus, that is going to influence our response. Remember, we're always moving toward pleasure or away from pain, toward pleasure or away from pain. And neuroplasticity is something that helps us with that. But here's the thing about that, our lizard brain. Unfortunately, we are at a biological, physiological disadvantage because our amygdala, it's a small little almond shape. In fact, we have two amygdalae, but they work in concert together. I'll just refer it to one region. Our amygdala, our lizard brain, our limbic system gets the signal before our prefrontal cortex does. And so by the time the data reach our prefrontal cortex, where our executive functions are, we're already negotiating our decision, right, to act and to respond. So our charge then is to practice and practice and practice before that information hits, and so our executive function can actually process the information in a healthy way. Our lizard brain, of course, is going to instantly give us that inherent reaction. But if we can train ourselves to pause and sit in the discomfort for just a nanosecond, it's really going to help our mind as the information moves up into the midbrain, up into the cortex, prefrontal cortex, where our executive functions are. And so, for example, for me, I have been historically claustrophobic, afraid of small spaces. And, there are a lot of different types of phobias and things out there, but it can be very, very limiting for me. I would get really nervous in parking garages, in elevators. I still don't do underground caves or things like that. I know you have a great salt cave here that everybody keeps suggesting I go visit, and I'm like, no thanks. I don't do underground. But, they used to be just completely debilitating for me. And now I've learned to actually pause and just take a moment, and I don't, I used to take the stairs all the time, which can be tough. I used to work on the 6th floor of an office building, but I didn't like to take elevators because of the small spaces. And these two parts of your brain, the limbic system and then also your executive functioning, you can kind of learn how to train them to work together instead. And that's really what emotional intelligence is, because the reality is that stress sucks. And if you're spending 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a week at work, now people are working remotely and they're at home. Maybe you're taking your work home. You're working even more hours, right? That's a lot of stress. And so it's important to be able to have this quality of emotional intelligence. I've talked to hiring managers over and over and over again in tech, and they'll all tell you that if you have two candidates with the same technical skills, even somebody with higher technical skills, they will always choose the person with the higher EQ. Always. They will hire that candidate over the other person. So instead of arguing, instead of getting defensive, instead of trying to convince other people of your position and being rigid in your reactions, you might instead use some of these techniques we're going to talk about today to communicate with them better, because you really have to take into consideration different cultures, different gender, different times of day, different even spaces that and times that people might be going through a difficult situation, a divorce, a loss, a sickness, an illness. I use this image because I used to live in Southern California, and when I first moved there, I'm from the Midwest, and so we do things a little differently than in California. And I moved to California, and when I first moved there was a great little coffee shop nearby, and I loved the coffee there. Like, it was so great. So every day I'd pick up my laptop and I'd go down to the coffee shop and I'd pull up and I'd start working. And one day I was sitting there doing my little website work stuff, and there were two men just sitting over on the couch, and they were like in it, right? They were face to face, they were talking, and I thought, wow, these guys they're about to get into a fist fight or something, right? Like, so I physically moved my body to the other side of the coffee shop, opened up my laptop, sat there, and then they were still just like on the edge of their seat, really getting into it. And then, in fact, they never got into a fight at all. It just turns out they were Armenian, and that's how they communicate. They're just very assertive and very aggressive when they talk. At the end of it, they hugged and they walked out together, and I was like, wow, I totally thought that they were gonna bust out into a fight. But it's just a cultural thing. And so you kind of have to be aware of that too, as we have these teams that are working across multiple cultures, time zones, and different continents, right? Things vary from culture to culture. And historical references of emotional intelligence, you can trace these back to Dharma in 1872. So he wrote Expression of Emotions in Man and Animals. And that was when we first started kind of learning about emotional intelligence. And then, of course, Daniel Goleman in 1995, that's when he wrote his first book. The last one here, Travis Bradbury and Jean Graves really tied it up in a bow. I like this because it goes through each chapter, the 26 facets of emotional intelligence, and at the end it has a quiz, and then you can even go back and take the quiz again to see on how well you improved. So I really like the Emotional Intelligence 2.0 book, and it's really, really great for beginners with that personal assessment. I do want to mention about personal assessments. When I take them, it's important to kind of take them within a certain context, right? So when we take them with an idea in mind about how we're performing at work or how our personal relationships are, you're going to get a lot more insight into your behavior and your emotions. So what is emotional intelligence, or your emotional quotient, your EQ? It's our ability to monitor one's own and other people's emotions, to discriminate between different emotions and label them appropriately, and to use emotional information to guide thinking and behavior. Emotional intelligence also reflects our abilities to join intelligence, empathy, and emotions to enhance our thought and our understanding of interpersonal dynamics. Really, what that means is a fancy way of saying, do you get it? Right? I spend so much of my life just going, I don't get it. So emotional intelligence says, do you get it? And if not, well then, how can you? And there are 26 different facets of it. And so it's important to understand that somebody who maybe struggles, let's say you're on the autism spectrum, let's say you have Asperger's or you have ADHD, somebody who struggles with some kind of a developmental challenge, they're going to have stress or anxiety in a certain area. We learned earlier about ADHD sufferers who have a hard time with that short-term memory, right? And so the good news is, of course, is that there are 26 different traits of that, influencing factors of emotional intelligence. So you can just work on one of those factors for 3 months and then move on to another one and move on to another one. Somebody who is on the autism spectrum, they're going to struggle with situational awareness, right? Body language cues, things like that. But that's okay, because with emotional intelligence, you can cultivate other things in other areas. And so at the end of my talk, I'm going to give you 5 tips on how you can do that. But let's go over what emotional intelligence is and those traits. There's 4 different categories, and we're not going to go over all 26 traits today, but I will give you a few of them. So there's awareness of self. Emotional intelligence starts, number 1, with awareness of self. That's where it begins. And then awareness of others, and management of self, and management of others, and how you are engaging and contributing into your community. So let's go through all of these. First one is awareness of self. It's really hard to look in the mirror. I get that. Is anyone really, really excellent at looking at other people and telling them exactly what's wrong with their lives? Is anyone else really good at that? Because I am so good at that, especially when our emotions are removed from their lives, right? And so it's really easy to observe certain qualities in other people that maybe we want to overlook, or we have bias against, or an aversion against in ourselves. So it's really hard to look in the mirror. But here's the thing. The only reason why I can identify that quality in you and observe it is because I have some kind of a relationship with it. Either I have worked through that thing, right, in myself, and I've overcome it, and I've learned to overcome it, and I see you acting it out, and it's triggering to me. Or it's either because I have that quality in myself, and it's activating me because I can recognize it. If I didn't have some kind of relationship with that quality, I wouldn't be able to recognize it in you. So if you find yourself judging other people, a really good tool is to pause and go, where is this showing up in my life? And what can I do to overcome that challenge? When we know our emotions, when we have a very accurate self-assessment, then it helps us understand others better. Another trait is emotional self-awareness, and so this is how we perceive emotions. It's the ability to detect and decipher emotions in faces, in pictures, in voices, in cultural artifacts. It's including the ability to identify your own emotions as well, how we perceive those emotions. And a really good indicator for this, to bring more awareness, is to look at where in your life you spend a lot of time. Hey, this is really great. I'm going to do more of this. And then look at the areas in your life that you tend to avoid. Those areas that you tend to avoid are probably where your challenges lie, and you could use a little bit more focus on that, because you maybe have some blind spots. We have a tendency to do what comes easy to us, to naturally do what comes easy to us. Remember, we're moving toward pleasure or away from pain. Accurate self-assessment. I suck at that. Like, I could be bombing this talk right now, and I have no idea. I struggle with accurate self-assessments, and so I take a lot of different types of assessments, right? Taking self-assessment quizzes, it helps us learn a little bit more insight about our tendencies, about where our challenges lie, about what kind of maybe improvements that we need, maybe confirmation biases that we have. And so taking an accurate self-assessment is a really important part of emotional intelligence. And I just want to say, I did mention a little bit earlier, that self-assessments are descriptive, they are not prescriptive. right? We've all heard that person who goes, oh yeah, I am an ENGTBXY whatever on the Myers-Briggs scale, and that's just how I am, right? It's super annoying. Oh, I'm totally green on the DISC, a self-assessment. I'm green all the way through and through. That's just how I am. So y'all are gonna have to work around me and deal with me, right, in that, because that's how I am. Self-assessments, however, are just descriptive. They're not prescriptive. They don't tell you and define you, this is who you are. So when I encourage you to take a self-assessment test, any kind of Myers-Briggs or DISC or True Colors or anything like that, think about it within the context of a project, within the boundaries or the parameters of a relationship, and that's going to help you out a little bit more. This is why, again, I like that Emotional Intelligence 2.0 book, because then what happens is you can go back, the book will tell you where you need to improve, and then you can go back and take the assessment again and go, hey, where did I improve? How much did I improve? It's not something that just defines who you are. You can always improve in these areas. So don't use self-assessments as reasons to say, oh, this is just how I am. This describes me, and I'm not going to ever change. Deal with it, right? The next part is management of self. Now, part number 2 of emotional intelligence is management of self, and a big part of that is behavioral self-control. My coach, Mr. Mark Rowland of Rocketeer, he always encourages us to remember that we have 2 internal and 2 external superpowers. Unless you were born with some debilitating disease, every single one of us has 2 internal and 2 external superpowers. Our external superpowers are our words and our actions. Our internal superpowers are our thoughts and our emotions. And we all have the ability to control them. And if you don't, then maybe you just need a little bit more work in those areas, right? So how do you manage yourself? With discipline, with intent, with love, with compassion. Think about that. However you treat yourself and you manage yourself, this is how we're going to treat others. If you're really hard on yourself and you're, oh gosh, if your internal language is going, oh, you dummy, why did you do that? Then guess what? As soon as your colleague makes a mistake, what are you going to say? It's not very professional, it's not very nice, and especially if you're a leader, you're not going to get very good results out of your team by belittling people. And so you have to choose your state of mind wisely and make sure that at any given moment you are controlling those 4 superpowers. The next thing is integrity. Integrity is a facet of emotional intelligence that I was using before I even knew what emotional intelligence was. I had, at one point in my life, 14 different jobs in 11 years. I was just moving, and I'd move across the country, and then I'd go here, and then I'd be like, oh, these people are crazy, I'm tired of this, and I would move, and then I'd go over here, and things would blow up, and I'd be like, there's so much drama, I quit, what is wrong with these people? And then over here, and then pretty soon I was spinning around, and I was like, wait a minute. There is one common denominator in all of these situations, and that was me, right? So I decided I wanted to have different results, and I wanted to act in integrity no matter what. Integrity is what we do when no one's watching. Integrity is what we do when no one's watching, and it is one of the 26 facets of emotional intelligence, and it is one of the easiest things to work on. Awareness of others is part 3 of emotional intelligence. Remember, we talked about awareness of self, management of self, awareness of others. And awareness of others' emotions is a big key for emotional intelligence. So according to lots of different studies, 7% of communication is just verbal. right? So that means the remaining 93% is based on voice, it's based on body language. So watching body language, facial expressions, these things can help improve your communication. So think about what signals people are communicating to you. You can improve rapport with people by mirroring what they're doing. So if you're in a meeting and somebody folds their arms, you can kind of fold their arms. If they adapt and sit in their chair like this, you can do this. Also, pay attention to your own body language and what your own body language is communicating. You can tell just by watching me speak that I'm excited to be here, that I enjoy speaking, right? What would happen if I came out and I went, "Hi, everybody. Welcome to my talk today. I'm Christina, I'm here from Las Vegas," right? Like, that's not going to be very effective. What am I communicating? Stress, fear, discomfort, I don't want to be here. And that's not going to be a very good quality in a public speaker. And so pay attention to what your own body language is communicating. Are you on meetings, either video or even in person? Are you slouching in the chair? Are you crossing your arms? Are you twitching your legs or rubbing your hands, things like that? I used to be a co-managing director for Girls in Tech Las Vegas for almost 4 years. It's a nonprofit where we did tech education, STEM education in the community for young girls. And we would host meetings, and we'd see all the squares on the computer. And we'd see all the squares on the computer, and people would be talking and things. And I kept getting distracted, and it was so annoying. And so you have 25, 30 women on this call, and out of the corner of my eye, it was just constant, this distract. And as it turned out, it was me. I was the one moving, drinking my water, all this, right, adjusting, and I realized the nervous habits that I was communicating and the distraction from the other speakers that were on the meeting. And so I had to really force myself to chill out and do less of this. So another thing you can do is you can watch your intonation, your pitch, your cadence, because your emotions are going to be expressed through that. You can control what you're communicating through vocal cues and through your body language. Empathy. Empathy is really big right now and very much needed. Empathy is walking a mile in someone's moccasins. Sympathy is being sorry that their feet hurt. It's important to note that empathy and sympathy are not the same thing. Empathy connects us. Empathy brings us together. Sympathy causes separation, in fact. Sympathy wants to maybe put a silver lining on something. If your friend is grieving, if your friend is having a difficult part in their life and they're going through it, and well, at least this, right? You try to put a silver line, or you try to fix it for them. That's what sympathy says. And so empathy is really, feeling that you understand and share another person's experiences and emotions. Even if you haven't gone through that very specific thing, you can still empathize with their situations, the ability to share in someone else's feelings. Social and situational awareness, I put this slide in here because this is a really good indicator, especially like at conferences where you're meeting new strangers or you have small talk. If you look down and the other person, you think you're having a great conversation and their feet are pointing toward you, then chances are that they're paying attention and they're listening. But if you're having a conversation and you're telling somebody about your great project and your new vacation and what's going on at work, and their feet are pointing toward the door, it's a really good indication that you should probably stop talking now because they are not listening to you and they are not paying attention. So we maintain, eye contact like 30 to 60% of the time on average when we're in person. And so if you can maintain that kind of eye contact, then you're doing pretty well. Now, this is why people get Zoom fatigue or, fatigue from all these video meetings, because we are not used to just staring at a big head one-on-one with direct eye contact 100% of the time. We are unaccustomed to that. Normally, it's only about 30 to 60% of the time on average. Your service and orientation is also an important part of emotional intelligence, how you give back to the community. And then management of others. This refers to, how you're influencing your community. When you've put the first parts together, awareness of self, management of self, awareness of others, management of others, right? Your contributions to your community are important. So this is where we build our tribe, understanding our emotions and comprehending emotional language, and appreciating the complicated relationships with those emotions is helpful, because we then develop the ability to appreciate slight nuances in those relationships. I have very complex relationships with different people and close friends in my tribe where they volunteered for my nonprofit organization. I volunteered for theirs. We've collaborated on contracts together. Maybe their kid has babysat my kids before. Maybe I've mentored their children through college. We have lots of different relationships within one person, one-on-one relationship. We wear lots of different hats, and it's very nuanced. Not everybody can do that. And, understanding how to build your tribe and what place that everybody has in your life is important. How do you choose the people who support you? How do you choose the people that you support? Communication is a two-way street. A lot of us know this person who just squawks at you and calls it communication, and that is not effective at all. In fact, the only way to change someone's mind is connect with them from the heart. So again, we've got to have empathy when we communicate with others, especially now. People are under a lot of strain, and not all of us are equipped to process the conflicting emotions and the additional stress that come along with that right now. Powerful influencing skills is another trait of emotional intelligence, and my trainer, who is a neuroscience-based physical fitness trainer, always reminds me that we are never not motivated to do something, because I go in there and he's like, hey, how did it go? You did this week? Did you meet your goals? I'm like, oh, no, not really. I just wasn't motivated. And he said, in fact, you are wrong, Christina. We are always motivated. You may not have been motivated to work out. You were motivated to spend an hour on TikTok instead. You were motivated to go for a walk instead. You were motivated to whatever, but you just weren't motivated to work out. So we are never not motivated. And so if you understand what's motivating your team, you're going to have powerful influencing skills. And you don't have to be a manager or supervisor to do that. You can work from within your team and help motivate and support your peers as well. So when we understand the perspectives of ourselves and others and what's motivating them, then we can all move toward that common goal. We can learn how to best inspire people toward that common goal. Mentoring and coaching others. I have been a mentor for many years. I especially enjoy, I mentor first-generation Asian Pacific Islander students on behalf of my late husband's memory. And in technology especially, we need a lot of mentors to pass on their experience. People sometimes think, but I'm not an expert. I don't have anything to share, or I'm not a tech lead or an owner or anything like that. In fact, you don't have to be. Mentorship just means sharing experience. right? It can be something like negotiating a salary. It can be something like learning a new piece of tech. Even at the most basic level, people are out there looking for mentors. And so you could mentor somebody once a quarter just for coffee or a quick Zoom meeting. Just open up your screen and talk to somebody for an hour. You can help them work through a difficult task or I've helped mentor people through stuttering and communication or transitioning into tech. If they're shifting careers, that's another way you could do it. And the last part is teamwork and collaboration. How well do you collaborate with others? I once went through a job interview for an entry-level front-end web developer. And I sat down with the CEO, and we were talking, and the interview went really well. And I said, okay, cool. So I guess, the next part, like, I'll meet with the team lead, and, we can just kind of go from there. I'll meet the team. He said, oh, no, you don't talk to the team lead. And I said, excuse me? He said, oh, no, I keep him, he stays up in a penthouse in one of the hotels down on the Strip in Las Vegas. And if anybody needs anything, you just tell me and I'll communicate it to him, because otherwise, his head explodes but his code is brilliant. His code is really, really great. And I thought, oh yeah, this probably isn't going to work out all that well. How well you collaborate and work within a team is a big part of emotional intelligence. So, don't be that guy. So I'm going to leave you here with 5 tips for improving your emotional intelligence. Here is an example. Does anybody know what this is? Can you tell me what that is? This is a picture of a walk-in cooler. And so when I was in my early 20s, I served as a waitress in restaurants. And this is a really awesome tool, because the quality of walk-in coolers, in fact, is that they're perfectly sealed and very well insulated. And so on a busy Friday night, when it was really crazy and super hectic and everybody's running around and you're hot and the kitchen messed up your order again and the customer is complaining or whatever, I would just go into the back, open up the door, shut it, and scream as loud as I can. Take a break. And pause. I did this talk, I did a workshop at Microsoft in Texas, and one of the people there raised their hand and they said, oh yeah, we just had a chair in our walk-in freezer. We called it the office. Yeah, I get it. I totally get it. And so, you might not have access to a walk-in cooler, but what you can do is you can pause. You can maybe take a drink of cold water. When we do that, it forces our nervous system to actually respond, reset, and react in a different way, because it shifts that response at a physiological level. Maybe you go for a walk. Go for a brisk walk. That'll create a little bit of space. Just take a break, And so whatever your challenges are, you're still responsible for communicating effectively. And going off on a rant, taking it out on your teammates, blowing up, it's not going to be effective. It's definitely not going to get you the results that you want. And you're still kind of expected to manage yourself. So this is a way to do it. Even if you're just taking 5 minutes to breathe, 10 minutes to breathe. That's my first tip. Create some space. Pause, breathe, vent to a buddy. If you don't have a buddy right then and there, this is where the fake it till you make it comes in, until you can get yourself a buddy, or you can get to your therapist or your counselor or your partner, and you can actually kind of let those feelings out. Maybe you want to write. That'll help too. Sometimes we just need to pause and create that white space. We are not made to go from one crisis to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And that is really, really overwhelming. It's really jarring for our nervous systems. And it's going to, keep eating us and eating us and eating us until we explode. It's not manageable. And so you got to take these breaks. In fact, as we say it around a software, sometimes working looks like staring out the window. That's where some of our best creative problem solving happens, when we learn to apply the knowledge that we already have into creative solutions for our clients. Here's some indicators that you might need to take a break. Pushing. It's really good to be driven toward a goal, but it's easy to kick it into overdrive and then overwork and then hyper focus. This will cause burnout. So pushing is an indicator. Perfection. If you are not launching the product and getting it out the door, and you're not shipping it because you're stuck in analysis paralysis, that's a good indication that you need some more white space in your life. Right? Analysis paralysis. This is where one person is responsible and everything is just bottlenecking behind them because they're too afraid to make a decision. And so you'd be better off beginning the project with clear goals and then implement a launch process that has checks and balances along the way so you don't get stuck in analysis paralysis. Another one is busyness. Oh my gosh, I used to be so good at this. I used to just be so busy. I'm so busy. I can't do that. I'm busy. I can't do this. I'm busy. I'd love to make your thing, but I'm busy. And really, it was just busy work, because busyness does not necessarily mean that you're being effective, you're being efficient, or you're being productive. So we can shift our perspective. This is another thing that we need to do. And shifting your perspective will definitely help you understand your emotions and yourself and your others. You can pause. You can see it from their perspective. You can see it from your perspective and see how both of you are contributing. Right? There is a whole entire wheel of cognitive biases that is out there, and so we need to understand and empathize with other people and where they're coming from. Here are some questions for avoiding bias. There are so many of them, and so if we ask ourselves these questions, then in fact we can build better products, build better services for our clients that are not starting with unforeseen circumstances and biases. So shifting our perspective, almost as if we're watching the situation on TV. We did this little exercise, if somebody saw my talk earlier about how we can learn to say no. And so if you look at the situation almost as if you're watching on TV, you can see the interpersonal dynamics between people. The other thing is to get curious. Ask curiosity questions. Ask follow-up questions to those questions. I used to be super awkward. So, how are you doing? Good? Everything fine? Yes. Okay. It would be really awkward, right? And so if we ask open-ended questions, then we can get a little bit more clarity, a little bit more connection to people. We can ask these follow-up questions along the way, right? And so this actually helps us find commonalities between ourselves and the other person. When we find those commonalities, then we're going to create more connection together. And so these are some really good follow-up questions that if anybody's interested, I can share these with you if you want them imprinted. The other thing is redirecting. If you don't like all the attention on yourself, you can just redirect the questions, because people love talking about themselves. Have you ever heard that before? Had that experience where you ask people questions and then they pause and like, gosh, I really like you. You're great. And you're like, I didn't really say anything. You talked the whole time. Because people like talking about themselves. It feels good. And so you can have redirecting questions if you're feeling uncomfortable and you're not really good at the small talk stuff, right? Just redirect it back to the other person. The fourth tip is to make a list. Make a list about how we're influencing our community with our talents, with our skills, right? You're taking responsibility for your contributions to the community, you're counting them, and you're celebrating them. You're celebrating your own growth. You're celebrating the achievements of your team. This is really important. It's a skill that I have sucked at for a very long time and that I need to work on even still to this day, is celebrating achievements. So that way we can assess how well we're doing and how far we've come. Because with small little incremental changes, you'd be surprised how much growth you can have. And the last tip that I want to leave with you with is to be engagey. Be engagey. How we relate to our community is important, and how we are connecting with our community. Like I said, I was co-managing director for Girls in Tech Las Vegas for almost 4 years, and so that has been really integral for me for finding new people to connect with, to meet up with, who have shared interests in startups, in entrepreneurship, and in technology. Here's a good book that talks about that. It's about how emotional intelligence is associated with people-centered leaders, people who are humble, people who are honest, people who are ethical, right? So it's one thing to be a leader who might be charismatic, but charisma and jumping up and down on the stage and you know, talking about myself and just being focused on myself doesn't necessarily help everyone and the whole entire team get ahead. And then one more thing about engaging is that even if you're a shy person, even if you're an introvert, you can still be engaging. The beautiful thing about being online is that you can write blog posts and get comments from people. You can connect on Twitter with people. There are a lot of different other ways that you can involve yourself, joining LinkedIn groups, without actually having direct engagement with people, if that freaks you out. There are a lot of ways to engage, you know, without actually directly engaging one-on-one or standing on a stage to speak with people. So what? That's emotional intelligence. What about that? You know, if you learn how to strategically manage your relationships, manage your own emotions and your own mindset, and understand how you work best, then you can really reduce your stress levels, improve your relationships, and get better results from your team. I am definitely living proof of that. So thanks so much, everybody. If you want to get some more information, there's some more information on my website. Anybody who wants to talk a little bit more about this stuff, I'll offer you a free 30-minute consultation if you want to talk about training or mentorship or emotional intelligence, any of that stuff. And I appreciate your time. Thanks.